Hi everybody, Penny here. Welcome to my kitchen. So today I've decided to share with you a bread that I started making to help with my diabetes, and it's spelt bread, whole grain spelt bread. So I noticed through checking my sugars and whatnot that even though I was eating whole wheat bread from the grocery store, my sugars were still spiking after I had a sandwich or toast or whatever. So I Googled what flour or grain is better for diabetes to balance the blood sugars a bit better, other than whole wheat. And if you're milling your own whole wheat flour at home, that's a different story. But I read all about spelt flour, and it's delicious. I love it. So I've experimented with a couple of different recipes for spelt bread, and this is the one that I like the best. So it has yeast and water, salt, honey. I'm using olive oil. You can use whatever oil you normally have at home, and almond milk. Now you could use regular milk, you could use soy milk, you could use water, but it's unsweetened almond milk. Adds a really nice flavor. And a combination of 3 cups of whole grain spelt flour and 1 cup of whole wheat flour. I did find that 4 cups of the spelt flour, it was a little too heavy, but swapping out 1 cup for whole wheat flour, it was just perfect for me. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to start with our yeast, and I'm just using regular Fleischmann's. You can use whatever brand you like, traditional yeast, and we're going to use 2 teaspoons in your main bowl and a 1/4 teaspoon, so 2 1/4 teaspoons total. Then we are going to add a 1/4 cup of warm water, but not hot. And we're going to add about a tablespoon of honey, and I'm just going to eyeball that. If you want a little less honey, you can, or if you want a little more honey, you can do that as well if you want a bit of a sweeter bread. But the yeast does need something to feed on. So we need to leave that there for about 10 minutes to proof, to fluff up, and then we'll be right back. Hi everybody, so it's been 10 minutes and our yeast is nice and fluffy and all bloomed and proofed. It's great. So we have a little fruit fly. It's that time of year. And if anyone's wondering what this is in the corner there, that is savory. So a friend of ours has his own farm, him and his wife, and of course knew we were from Newfoundland, and I was saying it's very rare to find savory up here, and they were growing it in the garden, so they brought us some, and so we're just hanging it and letting it dry. So it's great. And my other friend Karen, hi Karen, she brought me some savory from Newfoundland because they came up in July and had a little visit, and so now I've got lots of savory, so that's great. Anyway, back to the spelt bread. Now, spelt in itself is very high in fiber, has more protein than whole wheat flour, and it is not gluten-free, but it is low in gluten. So if you're gluten sensitive, this might be good for you because it's much easier to digest than whole wheat flour, unless you mill your own. Again, that's a whole different ballgame. But it's not gluten-free. But because of that, it doesn't rise very much. So you're not going to get big, high, fluffy bread out of this. It is going to rise a little bit, but not like, old-fashioned white bread. So we are going to add to that our 1 cup of unsweetened almond milk. If you want to use regular milk, like I said, you can. Your bread may not rise as much because dairy tends to impede yeast. It impedes yeast. Not that your bread won't rise at all, but it would rise a little better without dairy. Okay, so to our almond milk, we are going to add 1/3 a cup of the oil. And then we are going to add 1 teaspoon of salt. And then we'll give that a stir just to dissolve the salt. And now that our yeast is all proofed and bloomed, the salt shouldn't bother it at all. Okay, so that's grand. So we're going to pour that in. So next comes our flour. Now when you're measuring the flour, I've already measured it, but I'll just do an example. So you want to scoop it out and level it a little bit. Maybe do that if you suspect there's an air bubble in there. And then with the flat side of your knife, level it off. And that is a properly measured 1 cup of flour. But in here we have 3 cups of flour, of spelt flour, and 1 cup of whole wheat flour. So I'm just going to put 1 cup in first. Now we're going to use a wooden spoon, and we're going to use the handle. Not really sure why, but I've watched many chefs, including Jamie Oliver, use the handle of a wooden spoon rather than a spoon. And for some reason, it works better than using an actual spoon. So we're going to get all that. Make sure you get in the sides. So we've got about half of that added in there now. And then we're going to add the other little bit. Now, if you're using a stand mixer, you would do the exact same thing, but it would come together much faster and with your dough hook. So now we're going to add the rest of it. So same thing with the machine. You're going to let your dough hook go, and it's going to mix and mix and mix and mix and mix. Make sure you get the sides. And it's going to start to come together quite nicely. And at about this stage, when it starts to come together like that, we're going to switch to our clean hands. Okay? Now, obviously, with a dough hook on a machine, you're going to be stopping it and scraping down the sides with a spatula, and then getting your dough hook in action again. But we're using our hands because not everybody has a machine. I do, but I'm doing this with my hands so I can show you how to do it a bit better. I'm going to turn that over. We're going to start scraping down our sides a little bit, because when our sides are all clean and all of that is incorporated into the dough, we're done. So spelt flour does not need to be kneaded as much as a whole wheat flour. We're not looking to develop that gluten at all. Okay, just a couple more little, and as you can see, pretty much all the flour has been absorbed into that beautiful dough. Now, we're going to go for our oil again. And I'm going to use this hand to lift out the dough. It is a little sticky, and that's okay. Then we're going to take our oil, put it all over the bowl, maybe scraping up a little bit of dough as we go. Put it all over the bowl. Look at that. She is beautiful. She's all consistent. She's not like a clump of dough, a flour over here and something else over there. She is lovely. And that's it. So now we're going to put a bit of oil, turn it over, pat her down. Now I'm going to ask Barry if he can pass me a piece of saran wrap. While he does that, the oven is not on, but the light bulb is on. So we have the air conditioning on today because it is quite warm. And this needs a warm, draft-free place to proof, to rise. Now, it should double in size in about an hour. So if you want to, you can put the light on in the oven. Don't turn the oven on, but the heat from the light bulb will be warm enough to make sure that this stays warm. Or you can wrap it in a couple of towels, put it in a corner, a nice warm corner. But in any case, we'll be back in about an hour. Okay, so it's been an hour, and as you can see, it is more than doubled in size, which is great. Excuse me. Now, when you take the saran wrap off, don't ball it up, because we're going to use that again, okay? But in the meantime, we're just going to take a little bit of flour and scabber it over our board like that, not too much. And then we're going to just give that a little punch. And then we're going to take it out of the bowl like that. Yay, look at that. And we're not looking to knead it as such. We're just looking to get all the air out of the dough. Okay? And make it a little bit square. There we go. Now, I grew up making 3 buns for my bread, but this is just 1 loaf, and we're not gonna knead it to make it into another loaf. We're going to take our square, we're going to fold it in half, we're going to take the other side, fold that in half, and then we're going to start to roll. And as we roll, we're going to tuck the 2 sides in under. And that's going to be our loaf. It is super, super easy. Then we're going to put it into our greased pan. And just don't squat it in there, but you know, make sure it's in there nice and snug. Now, we're going to spray, or you can use a little bit of butter, or you can use a little bit of oil, but we're going to spray our saran wrap so that it does not stick to our dough. And we're going to lay it over the top, and then we're going to lay a tea towel over the top, and then we're going to lay another tea towel over the top. And that's going to stay there for another half an hour. And while that's resting and rising, proofing for another half an hour, I'm going to turn the oven on 375. So we're going to lay this on top of the stove, unless you're cooking something, and then of course you don't put it on top of the stove. But we're not cooking anything right now. So I'm going to put that on top of the stove, so that while the oven is heating up, that little bit of heat coming up from the oven will help it rise. So we're going to leave that there for half an hour, and then we'll be back. So our loaf has been rising for half an hour, and as you can see, it has a lovely little rise on it. So gently take off your saran wrap. And the oven is at 375, so we're going to put it in the oven. And then turn the oven down to 350. And we're going to put the timer on for 40 minutes. And we'll be back. Hi everybody, our bread is baked. So, I'm a little disappointed, but on the other hand, I'm kind of glad it happened, because now I get to explain something to you. As you can see, our loaf is a little sunken in the middle. So, I normally do this in my KitchenAid stand mixer, and it goes much faster than my hands do. And it needs it a little bit more. There's a few things that can happen when you make bread and cause it to sink like this. One would be that their yeast is not, it's old and past its expiry. I don't think that's it, because it blossomed and proofed really nicely. So I don't think that's the issue. The other thing is that you didn't have enough yeast. And I know we did, because I've made this before. But I've never made it by hand before. I've always thrown it in the mixer, in the stand mixer with the dough hook. And as soon as it comes out from kneading and all the sides of the bowl are clean, basically, there's no flour left. That's it. She's kneaded. You don't have to keep kneading it and keep kneading it like for 8 to 10 minutes like you do with white flour to develop that gluten. Because there's not as much gluten in spelt flour anyway. But if you don't knead it enough, this can happen. The other thing that can happen is too much liquid. So I don't think that's the issue either. Like I said, I've done this loaf before, and you don't get a big pillowy loaf like you do with white bread. But it should have stayed even across the top. So I think what happened is I didn't knead it enough. And I did a little quick Google search. And if you don't knead it enough, it will still rise because it rose beautifully. But then when you go to work with it again, after it's risen, it will deflate really, really quickly, which it did. If you go back in the video, it did. As soon as I touched it, it went. So I think that is the mistake that I made. So learn from my mistakes and give it just a couple of minutes more in the bowl of, fold it over and push, fold it over and push of kneading. Now don't do that for like 5 minutes or anything, because I have over kneaded my spelt bread before. And what happens is it gets overworked, and then when you go to cut it, it's really, really crumbly instead of nice and fluffy. So be careful. You only want to do it for a couple of minutes. However, it smells delicious. And we're going to give it a cut. It is a little bit warm. Certainly not too warm to handle, too hot to handle. And it cuts beautifully. And there's the inside. See? It's just gorgeous. Smells wonderful. It's got a lovely, spelt has a lovely nutty taste. And that just little bit of whole wheat gives it a little bit of fluff. So let's take a bite. Oh yeah, it's still good. So I hope you give it a go. But remember, knead it a little bit more than I did. Maybe just for 2 minutes or so. Yes, Daisy, I'll give you some in just a minute. I hope you give it a go. Enjoy. Bye. There.